Baseball fans thought they'd seen everything until the Yankees hit 15 home runs in a single weekend. In their first 3 games of the 2025 season, the team tied a long-standing MLB mark that left commentators scrambling for answers. Not steroids, not juice balls. The real reason lived inside the bat. A design so strange it looked like a bowling pin, but still 100% legal. The secret wasn't just swing speed, it was hidden in physics most fans had never heard of, like rotational inertia and the trampoline effect. And here's the twist. Removing weight can increase power. We'll show you how, with physics. For a sport built on stability, the sudden burst looked almost unreal, and everyone was trying to explain what they just saw. When baseball looked broken. The weekend didn't just offer a barrage of highlights, it forced people to rethink what they were watching. The Yankees tied an MLB record by hitting 15 homers in their first 3 games, and by Sunday night the numbers made jaws drop across the league. Fans, commentators, and even players kept circling the same question. How could one team suddenly shatter expectations in a sport that usually shifts by inches, not by earthquakes? Part of the shock came from how consistent baseball had always looked. Generations of athletes carried nearly identical bats to the plate, swung from the same distance, and faced pitchers who worked with a known set of tools. The balance between offense and defense moved slowly over decades, but the shape of the game held. That's why those 15 home runs stood out so sharply. They weren't the product of a generational slugger arriving or a summer of hot weather. They represented something visuals had already begun hinting at. The equipment itself looked different. The deeper you looked, the stranger the story became. Just a few years ago, analysts agreed that baseball had tilted heavily toward pitchers. Modern velocity had climbed to levels earlier players would have called impossible. Training techniques, biomechanical analysis, and advanced strength programs pushed fastballs into the triple digits with regularity, something far less common a decade earlier. Breaking pitches picked up sharper spin and deceptive movement. Everything pointed toward hitters facing narrower margins for success, fewer chances to square a ball, and declining home run rates. Yet suddenly those trends weren't visible in New York. Yankee hitters weren't just surviving, they were thriving against the hardest throwing era in the sport's history. When the explanation wasn't obvious, speculation took over. Fans revived familiar accusations. Maybe Major League Baseball had introduced a batch of juice balls. Maybe the Yankees adjusted fence distances without telling anyone. The more extreme theories even dragged performance-enhancing drugs back into the conversation. But drug testing remained strict, and ball specifications hadn't been altered. Those guesses felt like reruns of every past scandal. What none of them addressed was that the change was right there in every replay. The bat itself didn't look like the bats of the past 100 years. Slow motion shots revealed the odd outlines. Barrels didn't taper in the familiar way. Some appeared thick in the middle, others seemed to carry weight in offbeat proportions. At first, it was easy to miss, especially for casual viewers watching the broadcast angles. But once analysts clipped side-by-side comparisons, the difference became obvious. Swings carried a strange rhythm, and the resulting contact produced more than just good hits. They produced home runs that cleared fences with room to spare. For hitters, it felt like an opening. For pitchers, it bordered on demoralizing. A 100 miles per hour fastball is supposed to hand you an advantage, shrinking the hitter's reaction window almost to nothing. But bat after bat kept connecting, blasting fastballs out of parks that looked suddenly too small. You could see it in pitchers' body language. The disbelief after their best pitch was punished as if it were hanging over the plate. The velocity that should have dominated a modern lineup now looked like fodder in the face of redesigned wood. The most unsettling twist for traditionalists was that nothing about these new bats actually broke the rules. League regulations still require the bat to be made of wood. They cap barrel diameter at 2.61 inches, and they limit bat length. But the rules never specify the exact placement of the widest part or restricted how weight may be distributed along the cylinder. Designers realized that buried in those parameters, there was room to reshape the profile without violating anything. The conventional belief had always been that the thickest end must be at the barrel's far tip. But nowhere was that written. With that gap, engineers found enough leeway to produce something baseball had never truly confronted. Unconventional bats that functioned within every legal dimension yet performed nothing like their predecessors. Looking back, the oversight seemed almost obvious. Baseball is conservative by design, guarded by traditions that resist dramatic shifts. The bat had become a symbol that tied the present to the past, a direct line connecting Babe Ruth's era to today's players. Through integration, new stadium dimensions, and the evolution of protective gear, the bat hardly changed. Fans trusted it as a constant when everything else moved more quickly. But by spring 2025, that perception broke. The Yankees had shown that even this seemingly permanent artifact contained hidden possibilities. Other teams weren't slow to catch on. Analysts clipped frame after frame of New York hitters, calculating swing speeds, studying the ball's exit velocity, and cross-referencing the dimensions they thought they saw. Executives asked equipment representatives where the loophole came from and how quickly those bats could reach their own players. It didn't take long for the realization to spread through dugouts and clubhouses alike. This wasn't a one-week fluke. This was the start of something structural, and ignoring it meant handing a rival every advantage. That's why the weekend didn't pass as a quirky highlight in history. Baseball has always seen hot streaks where a player or even a whole lineup locks in temporarily. But this looked different because it wasn't luck. It wasn't weather, and it wasn't coincidence. It was design. Design that landed squarely within the rulebook, but managed to rearrange how contact worked, how velocity interacted with wood, and how pitchers could protect themselves. A game that prides itself on continuity suddenly found its most recognizable piece of equipment rewritten, not with a reinvention of the ball, but with a rethinking of bat. Those who saw the difference up close understood change was happening. Commentators hinted that the shape reminded them of something out of place. The silhouette clashed with tradition. Fans started comparing screenshots, noticing how the bats didn't resemble anything their heroes used. The conversation began drifting from mystery toward ridicule as more people pointed out how awkward these bats looked in real time. And just as quickly, others argued that the look didn't matter at all because the results spoke louder than the silhouette. It became the center of the debate, not only because the bats worked, but because they look almost comical in comparison to baseball's history. And once that realization settled in, observers began calling the shapes by names that stuck, nicknames pulled from everyday objects that didn't belong on a baseball field at all. A bowling pin in the batter's box. When the new bats appeared, the immediate reaction was unease. They weren't slim, balanced sticks in the familiar silhouette of generations past. Instead, the wood swelled in unexpected places, carrying bulk where no one expected it. The effect was so odd that from a distance they seemed as though they belonged to another game entirely. Images spread within minutes of the Yankees' weekend outburst, and one comparison stuck. They looked less like baseball bats than bowling pins. Screenshots circulated with dry jokes about misplaced props, and fans called them awkward, misshapen, the least graceful tools ever carried to the plate. But if the look made some laugh, the result silenced most of the mockery. To the fans who treasure baseball's continuity, though, the unusual profile was offensive all on its own. For purists who had grown up memorizing the shapes of Louisville sluggers and maple bats, this new silhouette felt like a betrayal. The bat, to them, wasn't just a piece of gear. It was tradition carved into wood. Decades of the game rested on its steady form, and even slight deviations could spark arguments. Now, seeing Yankees in classic pinstripes brandishing instruments that bulged unnaturally prompted words like ugly, wrong, and cheap. To those voices, these weren't bats at all, but novelties that mocked baseball's lineage. Hitters themselves didn't share those concerns. In the batter's box, the swollen outline didn't represent a joke. It represented an edge. Players spoke of how the larger middle barrel felt livelier on contact, how the rebalanced weight gave them a faster path through the strike zone. The barrel seemed to get on plane with pitches more quickly, and even with triple-digit fastballs, the bat provided a fraction more control. Asked what they thought of the ridicule, one player shrugged. As long as it made the ball jump off the wood faster, the rest didn't matter. This split was just as visible in dugouts. Coaches, steeped in old-school thinking, handled the new bats with suspicion. To them, the thick waist and sudden taper seemed impractical. Yet after inning upon inning of home runs, hesitation gave way to pragmatism. Numbers spoke louder than aesthetics. A bat didn't need to fit a poster, call back the memories of roof or mantle. It only needed to produce results in the present. The legal puzzle was crucial to its story. Major League Baseball's rulebook restricts a bat to no more than 42 inches in length and a maximum barrel diameter of about 2.61 to 2.625 inches. But while the widest point is capped, the rules do not dictate where along the bat that maximum may occur. For more than a century, bat makers followed convention, thin handles that expanded gradually until the end flared into the barrel. Nobody seriously tested rearranging weight in other shapes, not because the rules forbade it, but because tradition implied that was the correct design. The so-called Torpedo Bat simply stayed inside the same measurements while shifting its mass distribution. That subtle legal space made everything possible. By moving the thickest part of the bat closer to hands, designers reduced rotational inertia, giving players more swing speed without sacrificing stability. To the eye, this created the bulbous bowling pin outline, but to the hitter, what mattered was acceleration. The bat reached the impact zone faster, with more control, and packed force exactly where pitchers had become hardest to hit. The appearance wasn't meant to be comic. It was the precise geometry required for optimization. For decades, bat design had been stagnant. Adjustments between generations offered tweaks. Lighter models to chase quicker swings, heavier models to emphasize power, a balance option for players stuck in between. Only surface-level changes were tested. The Torpedo Bat treated the geometry itself as open territory, and in doing so unlocked physics no one had fully appreciated in competition. Fans saw strangeness, but players felt leverage reclaimed in their favor. Even with this knowledge, ridicule didn't subside right away. Posts online the bats up against toy hammers, novelty cooking utensils, and most often oversized pins from nearby bowling alleys. Normally, such derision might push athletes back to familiar choices. Reputation counts. Nobody wants to look absurd on highlight reels. But by 2025, baseball lived in an environment where every swing was tracked by radar and high-speed cameras. Data trumped visuals. If the new shape raised average exit velocity or turned grounders into homers, image could be negotiated later. That fact reframed the conversation. The bowling pin wasn't an accident or prank. Its design was a logical product of constraints, taking the literal words of the rulebook and applying physics rigorously to them. What resulted looked ungainly but functioned like an upgrade. It demonstrated that in sports, innovation doesn't always arrive dressed in elegance. Sometimes it enters looking clumsy but working precisely as intended. This recognition created unease far beyond Yankees fans or their rivals. Throughout the league, executives and equipment specialists began scrutinizing the bats closely. If one team proved they could produce seismic results under rules everyone shared, the rest had no choice but to follow or fall behind. That urgency reframed the experiment as precedent, and suddenly the absurd silhouette wasn't funny at all. It represented a competitive gulf. Beneath the surface, the bats also carried a hidden fingerprint. They were the product not of traditional bat makers alone, but of research rooted in physics labs. The strange outlines emerged directly from academic studies on momentum transfer, swing efficiency, and vibration control, topics that had occupied scientists for years without obvious links to professional sports. On opening weekend, however, those years of theory leapt off the page in spectacular fashion. The presence of that scientific mind was hardly obvious at first. Yet buried inside the unusual shape and striking performance was a line of reasoning that belonged to equations more than to batting practice. And as the home runs piled up, observers realized that to fully understand the bat's rise, they needed to look not only at the players swinging them, but at the researchers who had conceived of them in the first place. That connection would soon come into focus: the physicist in pinstripes. Aaron Leanhart's path into baseball began far from any ballpark. He earned a PhD in physics from MIT, later served as a professor there, and eventually made the unusual move to professional sports by joining the Yankees development staff in 2018. After his work gained traction, he later moved on to the Marlins. For a scientist used to focusing on precision instruments and fundamental research, this was an unconventional career trajectory. Yet to him, the core challenge of bat design was no different from the systems he had studied in the lab: how objects distribute energy when they collide, and how shifting mass changes the efficiency of that transfer. His academic work involved momentum transfer and vibration control, problems tied to aerospace parts, precision tools, and sensitive equipment. He realized that the same logic applied when a bat struck a ball traveling faster than human reflexes could comfortably track. The rebound, the vibrations through the wood, and the placement of mass all affected the outcome. Guides to batting had always discussed mechanics in terms of feel or sweet spots, but rarely in the phase-space language of physics. That gap caught Leanhart's attention, and what started as a side curiosity turned into a dedicated research project, even before he had any ties to the major leagues. When he began interacting with players, he did so with a narrow focus. Listen to where hitters actually made contact, and then adjust the bat's design with physics in mind. Traditional models distributed weight according to long-standing assumptions. Leanhart instead gathered information on swing tendencies and mapped them to contact probabilities. By shifting the bat's mass closer to the spots where hitters most often connected with pitches, he believed he could increase swing speed while keeping batted ball force high. This was not speculation. It was the result of combining player feedback with measurable calculations. The second problem he aimed to solve was vibration. Batters know the sting of miss hits, especially when pitches jam them inside. That sting isn't just discomfort. It reflects wasted energy, force failing to move into the ball. Leanhart looked at how altering the taper and redistributing mass changed vibrational modes. The effect was that flaws in contact produced less painful feedback, while also better preserving energy for the outgoing ball. Together, those two focused improvements, contact-centered mass and vibration control, were enough to generate measurable results. Early testing demanded improvisation. Players described the bat as odd, sometimes even funny-looking, but after a few swings, they reported different sensations. The barrel seemed to accelerate faster through the zone. Inside fastballs felt less punishing, and balls carried farther than expected. This was the kind of feedback Leanhart paid attention to. He wasn't working by crafting anecdotes into stories. He was aligning what players felt with what his equations predicted. The prototypes didn't try to answer every question about hitting. They targeted specific issues that science could quantify. That clarity is what gained the bat's entry into professional training environments. When the Yankees began experimenting with the design in drills, the metrics turned from small sample impressions into hard data. Sensors showed exit velocities climbing beyond previous averages. Swing paths that used to be sluggish edged quicker through the strike zone, sometimes by crucial fractions of a second. Weak contact on inside pitches began producing line drives and gap shots. This was tangible evidence in a pro setting, and unlike in the lab, it was measured against live elite pitching. The unusual silhouette of the bat was no longer just theory. It was generating on-field outcomes. Leanhart's shift from MIT to the Yankees drew attention because scientists seldom transition into baseball operations. His colleagues knew him as a physicist whose academic career had focused heavily on intricate technical problems. Seeing that attention turned toward raw performance on the field came as a surprise, but the timeline was clear. Starting in 2018, he joined the Yankees in a developmental capacity, applying what he knew about physical systems directly to bat construction. Later, he extended that work with Miami Marlins. Viewed in this factual way, the move was unconventional but coherent. He followed where his expertise made the most difference. Some observers in the scientific community remained skeptical. Advances in sporting equipment often come packaged with exaggerated promises, and distinguishing real physics from marketing language can be difficult. But skepticism began to soften when professional hitters reported immediate differences with measurable outcomes. Leanhart's work did not claim to make players stronger or faster. It claimed to make their swings more efficient based on the rules of mass distribution. The game itself supplied the validation to actual performance numbers. The critical moment arrived in front of cameras. During those first 3 games of the 2025 Yankees season, bats shaped by Leanhart's principles coincided with results that stood out dramatically. 15 home runs in the series, tying an MLB record. Analysts slowed down footage and identified the difference. The bulk of the bat sat closer to the handle, creating the bowling pin profile. Exit velocities jumped, swings looked smoother, and pitchers' best fastballs turned into extra base hits. The contrast between how odd the bat appeared and how consistently it generated results confirmed that the physics underpinning it mattered more than aesthetics. For Leanhart, this validation was not abstract. Baseball itself became the test. Environment, real pitchers, real games, recorded outcomes that mirrored his predictions. In science, reliable replication under adversarial conditions is the gold standard. Baseball supplied exactly that. The differences held up over repeated swings, multiple hitters, and live action with record-keeping scrutiny. It meant his years of effort had translated directly into sport-shaping impact. The presence of a physicist and team staff highlighted how the sport was changing. Baseball had long talked about analytics, statistics, probabilities, projections, but this was different. It was not about interpreting numbers. It was about taking physical laws and reconfiguring equipment accordingly, all while remaining within MLB's legal guidelines. It demonstrated that innovation didn't need to bend the rules to produce a visible shift in outcomes. It only required someone willing to treat a bat as an engineering problem rather than a sacred artifact of tradition. This new phase of the story also made something clear. The future of bat design was now part of baseball's central conversation. Players had felt it in their hands, opponents had suffered the results on the mound, and front offices had tracked the statistics. Tradition wasn't enough to keep old assumptions intact once physics proved there was room for improvement. That realization left a direct question hanging over the game. If altering how mass is distributed transforms performance so radically, what exactly happens when mass itself is reduced? Could stripping weight, something that sounds like it should weaken the swing, actually create more power? The paradox of removing weight. Baseball's most surprising design change rests on a counterintuitive principle. Taking material off the bat can actually increase the energy of a swing. The explanation doesn't lie in raw strength, but in how weight is arranged. Physicists describe this using the concept of swing weight, or moment of inertia. Mass placed farther from the hands increases resistance to rotation, making the bat slower to move. Pull that weight closer to the grip, and the same bat feels more responsive, accelerating to the strike zone with less effort. That difference doesn't just affect how the bat feels, it decides how much of the pitcher's velocity the hitter can catch up to. A lighter tip means the barrel travels faster to the point of impact, which raises exit velocity, even though the overall mass is reduced. In simple terms, speed multiplies the force delivered to the ball. Shaving a few ounces from the end of the wood effectively buys the hitter more time to decide, react, and still produce a swing fast enough to punish elite velocity. Modern research confirms that this gain in decision-making time can be the edge between a miss and a home run. It's important to note that there isn't one perfect bat weight for everyone. Experiments show each player has an individual peak swing weight, a point where our bat speed and power output balance most efficiently. Some players thrive with a slightly heavier feel, placing mass right where they tend to make contact. Others perform better with extremely low swing weight, maximizing quickness and control. The Torpedo Bat does not enforce a single solution. Instead, it allows the profile to be tuned to the hitter's strengths by shifting mass distribution without leaving the boundaries of MLB's Rulebook. This helps explain why the modern game favors lighter profiles than those used in baseball's early decades. In Babe Ruth's era, when pitching velocity was lower and reaction windows were wider, power often came from carrying bats over 40 ounces. Today, pitchers throw into the triple digits with breaking balls disguised until the very last moment. Hitters no longer have the luxury of dragging that much inertia through the hitting zone. A bat in the 31 to 33 ounce range, when balanced for faster rotation, gives a modern slugger the adaptability to recognize, hesitate, and still connect. The comparison shows how shifts in the environment redefine what power looks like. For players, the experience of swinging a bat with reduced rotational inertia is immediate. Heavy barrels often feel like they're pulling against the hands, forcing the hitter to commit early or fall behind. By contrast, a bat with redistributed mass moves with a whip-like quality. The barrel can be delayed by an extra fraction of a second, then snapped into the path of the ball with greater speed. That delay matters because it extends the decision-making window, letting batters track difficult pitches longer before committing to a swing. In a sport where outcomes are measured in milliseconds, this extended window can be the hidden factor that lifts batting averages and home run totals alike. When cameras track swings at high speed, the difference shows up in measurable ways. Lighter swing weight translates into faster angular velocity. Combine that velocity with a ball moving over 100 miles per hour, and the result is higher batted ball exit speed, whether or not the bat itself weighs slightly less. The formulas of kinetic energy make this clear. An increase in velocity squared quickly outweighs the loss of a few ounces of mass. What looks like subtraction in material actually produces greater addition in output. The Yankees' weekend surge charted directly onto this principle. Their success was not the product of brute power alone, but of faster swings meeting high-velocity pitches with improved efficiency. Even pitchers' best throws, designed to overpower hitters, suddenly looked vulnerable. The bats didn't change the arms delivering the ball, but they changed how much speed and leverage the batter could deploy in the razor-thin window of reaction. From the pitcher's perspective, it was like watching physics cut down the margin of error that once protected them at the mound. Beyond power, the rebalanced design carried other advantages that hitters quickly noticed in practice. Inside pitches stung less on poor contact, and hits off the end of the barrel felt less punishing. These improvements weren't as easily measured in raw output as exit velocity, but they played into players' comfort and consistency. It reinforced the idea that physics wasn't only about maximizing blast distance, it was about tailoring performance to the realities of human reaction time, hand control, and tolerance for discomfort over a long season. Removing weight doesn't sound dramatic when you describe it in ounces, but the effect during a swing is pronounced. Each ounce shave from the barrel reduces resistance disproportionately because it sits farthest from the hands. This is why even small adjustments can feel transformational. During testing, players often describe the sensation less in scientific terms than in expressions of pace. Quicker, snappier, easier to catch up. The underlying math supports their intuition, but the lived experience is as important as laboratory charts. For professionals forced to make hundreds of split-second decisions against world-class pitching, shaving fractions of resistance makes baseball playable at its fastest pace. This is why the paradox stands. Lighter isn't weaker, because the conditions of the modern game demand reaction speed more than club-like power. The bat has evolved from being seen as a hammer into being treated as a lever. Its function now centers on efficiency.